Today's class is net lease and multifamily, okay? Now, net lease is part of retail, but it is definitely a subsection that's very popular now, and I have a lot of experience with it. So, we're going to cover those to this class, but we will, in the future, cover more retail specific, and we'll go into more office and medical office and, industrial. I do have handouts if you want them, but this will be available where you can get emailed the whole thing, and it will also be on Dropbox. So everything we talk about is going to be videoed on YouTube, and the handouts will be available on Dropbox to you guys, okay? All right, so let's start with multifamily. Now, multifamily can be anything from a mobile home park to a duplex, okay? 1 or 4 units, these are usually, basically private investors, also mom and pops, and, even a lot of the residential agents, that's kind of something that they start with, and that's what a lot of people start with as far as investors. And it also is something that agents start with because they're a lot less sophisticated and a lot less complicated to do than once you go up in size, okay? So what would be the difference between a 4-unit and a 5-unit as far as classifications go?
Residential.
1 to 4 units are residential, and 5 units and above are commercial.
Right. That's a state law, that's a industry thing, so 5 and above, normally you're not going to go just based on square footage and comps like you do with residential. You're going to go with more the income of the property, what's the rent generating, what's the upside that the rent could generate. Okay, so on net lease, what's the #1 thing that investors and brokers talk about as far as pricing? What's the first thing they talk about? Cap rate. Cap rate, then price. In fact, the price sometimes is just, something that goes on the contract, but it's all about cap rate. With what are the 3, but what's the main one in multifamily?
Price per unit.
Price per unit or price per door. That is the main thing they want to know. Next is price of the property, and third is cap rate. Okay. Now in California, what's important about 15 and above units?
Manager. You need a manager on site if you have 16 units and plus.
Yes. There's a lot of buildings that are 15 units, and someone will have 3 15-unit buildings, 14, 12, whatever, under the threshold, because they don't have to have the expense of an on-site resident manager. There is little loopholes that you can do. I've had buildings where basically we just take a resident, give them a discount on their rent, and put a manager sign on their unit, and that's how we comply with the law. And basically, all the maintenance and everything like that is still handled by a main office. All they have to do is just say that they are the registered manager, and if someone gets locked out, they may or may not, but basically they just have to call someone else. So there's little loopholes around that, but technically you're supposed to have an on-site resident manager, on-site property manager, but it doesn't always have to be a manager. It could just be a husband and wife team. That's popular in some small buildings where the wife maybe will do the collect the rent and do the admin stuff. Husband does like maintenance and janitorial and custodial type work. But it doesn't, this resident manager doesn't have to be like anything specific. It's what you decide. So sometimes it's a maintenance person. It could just be a resident that they give a discount, okay? So that's something that's a California requirement. Now there's a little difference. If you do like Airbnb or nightly rentals, then there's a law that says anything 12 units and above you have to have an on-site person that's available in the middle of the night. So 12 units, if it's considered like a hotel or an Airbnb, like a nightly rental. But if it's like a monthly, like a setup as a regular apartment building, that's the threshold. Okay, so you pretty much have 3 different types of structures that run these. Owner-operators, that's usually like, doesn't always have to be small. I've worked with an owner-operator that we had a $500 million portfolio, and we bought like $80 million properties, but they're strictly an owner-operator. Everyone that works under them does not have to have a real estate license because you're working as a salaried employee of the owner of the property, okay? Third-party management, like Moss Group, you know, a regular third-party management company is set up like a real estate brokerage, and the people underneath them are technically required to have real estate licenses because they're doing third-party management for an owner, okay? Any questions about that? Okay. REITs is another structure, and REITs can be owner-operators. REITs is Real Estate Investment Trust. And this is the large Wall Street companies that buy thousands and thousands of units and have hundreds of apartments all over the country. And some of them are owner-operators, but most of them will hire third-party managers. And what works for them is what's called asset managers. And the asset manager acts as an owner, and they look at the long-term outcome of the property. So they're gonna like buy a property, and their acquisition criteria could be, we buy B properties, we go and rehab them, turn them to A properties, and then we turn around and sell them for a profit. That could be how they do business. Or it could be someone else that says, we only buy the very best A-plus properties in large major markets, and we hold them for 20 years. So we have a schedule where we want to be on top of everything to make sure that the maintenance is always done, so that at the end of 20 years, it's worth and it's in great shape. So there's different income criteria, but REITs are huge, and they buy properties all over the country, and they don't even care about going to the property. If the property is got the occupancy they want, if it's the class A, B, or C that they want, they'll buy it. There's different outlooks. Some of them buy in markets that are it's called high entry barriers. They want to be in very expensive markets because they don't want all the competition from every single other REIT or every other company. So they're going to buy in New York and LA or San Francisco that it's so expensive, only a few players, so they don't have as much competition. There's other investors, they do not want the big expense and the extra headache to own in the big markets because you got rent control, you got other issues. So they're going to buy in Atlanta, they're going to buy not in Dallas or Houston, they're going to buy in San Antonio because you can buy cheaper and you can buy more units, but usually they're going to stay full, okay? Some investors, they want the top dollar, top market rent, and if they have to have a few vacants because they're always pushing rents, they're going to lose people. There's other investors, they're not going to put the top quality, they're not going to put granite and stainless steel. They're just going to make nice amenities, but they don't want top rent. They just want to keep their buildings full all the time. That's their, that's kind of how they do business. So every investor, every REIT has a different criteria that they do. So what are some of the pros of multifamily? If you're thinking about the 4 main classes right now of retail, industrial, multifamily,
high demand.
what's
In the
okay.
multifamilies,
Security.
the security of the rents,
Yep.
because those are high demand units, retail and industrial. If they become vacant, sometimes they can be vacant for years.
You got that right. Okay, so you go and you buy an industrial property or an office building, you might not be able to even raise that rent for 5 more years. Where you got a a multifamily, within a year, you're going to be able to raise rents to market rent, and especially if you do a rehab. So that's one of the advantages. The other is retail has just been taking, a beating in a lot of, all the, dark Kmarts and, Sears and all the malls that are closing. So retail has been taking a beating, and a lot of REITs are getting out and they're going into multifamily, industrial, and office. But even office has issues. You have a big employer that closes down, and they close down 100,000 square feet. It's like, it might be hard to release that. So office is tough. I would say multifamily and industrial are the two hottest right now, okay? So what's some of the cons? I already went through some of them, but what's some of the cons also of multifamily?
Rent control issues.
Rent control, big one, yeah. There's
And if they don't pay their rent, it's hard to get them out sometimes in California.
right, right. Okay,
It's very
so
hard.
in retail, industrial, and office, the lease is what decides things. And when you go before a judge, you are pretty much in superior or equal footing with whoever your tenant is, because they consider your tenant sophisticated business person, and they don't consider them at a lesser status than you. In multifamily, they do. In multifamily, they're always going to be on the tenant side, and the tenant has many more rights than the landlord does, especially in California. I mean, here in Texas or, Nevada, it's like you can lock them out, throw their stuff. It's like it's different. But here it's tough, okay? So, yeah, eviction, you have to pay to relocate them here. There's rent control, there's low income. So, yeah, that's some of the disadvantages. And when I used to do a lot of net lease, that's why we set up a multifamily, is that we had all of these owners that have owned their properties in Koreatown, Mid-Wilshire, whatever, for the last 20, 30 years. They had all this equity, but we're like, hey, why do you want to worry about rent control and having a manager and all these things that you got to worry about, when you can take all that equity and flip it into a net lease property and go buy a Starbucks in the middle of Texas that's got a 20-year corporate lease and just collect the money. The tenant has to pay for everything, okay? So that's kind of how you kind of pitch that when you got someone that has, like, you kind of pitch what you have. But you can actually get two deals out of these. You can get somebody to sell this and get them to buy something else, and then do an exchange if it's a tax for, or just do the swap. Okay, so let's talk about net lease. Now, there's single net, double net, triple net. How would you explain triple net to someone?
Taxes, insurance, maintenance, paid by.
Zero landlord responsibilities.
Okay, but there's two kind of subcategories of that now, because what they've always said is triple net, there's also another one called absolute net now. Because on a lot of triple net, you still might have roof and structure and maybe even parking lot. So you got to look into those little things. But absolute net is where even roof, structure, which is the walls, and parking lot, all of that. I've even seen some where the taxes for the owner of the property are paid by the tenant, okay? So, I mean, there are some absolute nets that are absolute, where you can actually pitch this as just getting money into your mailbox each month, and you have nothing. And a lot of these are single tenant, where you don't have to worry about, losing half of your occupancy if you have a little strip center and one or two of your tenants leaves. So they're single tenant, think about like a single CVS, or a Starbucks, or a, Walgreens. A lot of them are corporate backed, which means the lease is what makes the property valuable. This dirt in the middle of Alabama might not be worth anything, but you put a Starbucks on it and give it a 20-year corporate backed lease, it's worth millions all of a sudden, okay? So that's what investors are buying, and even insurance companies and even REITs will buy it because it's something that is so solid that they're not worried about it going out of business. Even if it's a franchise, if it's corporate backed, the corporation will come and guarantee that.
We have a scenario, the common scenario I was telling you about, where market rents are 9 a square foot and they're getting 15 from Commons.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Now, there is another thing that investors do is that sometimes, now normally investors want at least 10 or 12 years, left on a, like they would ideally want 20 years, but once if there's still 12 years, whatever, and there's some escalation clauses, and if it's a good location, it's probably going to be renewed and all those kind of things. But there's other investors, they go and they look for net lease that have less than like 2 or 3 years left. And these are at what's called signalized corners in top markets because they're looking at this not as a triple net, they're looking at it as a land play because some of these have been there for the last 30, 40 years and the land is worth more as something else than as a Dunkin' Donuts, okay? So you always got to find out, what is my investor looking for? Are they looking to redevelop this, or do they want something nice and steady that's going to, just bring in cash for the next 10, 20 years? Okay. Let me know when I get down to 2, 3 minutes.
We got 16 and a half.
Okay, good. All right. So sometimes they're a land play. So let's talk about the pros of net lease. And one of them that I already put up here is because I used to have a huge team that were mostly on the phone, okay? So let me tell you that if you call up and you're, Joe Smith from Peak Commercial, you sound like every other broker that's calling and it's, kind of 50, hit or miss. It's more about your personality than, getting in the door. But if you call up and say, I just listed Starbucks and I want to know if you'd be interested in buying it, or I know you own a Starbucks a mile away, are you interested in this? So the credibility of using these names, like the credibility of saying we just listed CVS or we just sold a CVS or we have a 20-year on a Whole Foods, believe me, that gets you on the phone with some people, okay? So having the credibility of using these corporate names is very, very important. I'll tell you that right now. So it's like, if you can go after that business, it's a good business to go in. Because once you get relationships with these developers, franchise owners, and acquisition managers, either in the multifamily side or in net lease, that's business you can count on. And a lot of it is going to the seminars, going to the conferences, and meeting the actual people that makes these decisions, okay? Now, when you're dealing with big REITs, okay, they're not usually sellers. They usually are buyers. But if you get in with them and say, find out what their criteria is, because you can't call them and say, well, what are you interested in? They don't have time for that. They're professionals. You have to know it before you call them. You can go on their website, you can see that these guys buy medical office in top major markets between $10 and $50 million. So you know what they're buying. And if you have something like that and you send it to them, that's how you build a relationship. Then you go to a conference. There's ones for office, there's ones for retail, and then you meet that guy, you set up a meeting beforehand, you meet that vice president or director of real estate, and he's on an expense account. And you have a few drinks with him and he likes you. Then later, your conversations are much different from that because you have a relationship. And so 6 months later, when they have to sell properties, who do you think they're going to keep in mind? The guys like you that they have relationships with. So you might start with them as their buyers because a lot of those big REITs, they're long-term hold. But once in a while, they do have to sell properties, okay? But just as an example, I have agents that were at my former place where they would have relationships with these REITs, and when they sold, they didn't sell a Pizza Hut. They would sell a portfolio of 50 Pizza Huts, okay? And do a sale leaseback to make money. But then they also would get a call from these acquisitions guys, like at the end of the month or at the end of the quarter, and say, hey, I have $20 million to place. What do you have? And so we're just going through our properties to add up to 20 million at the right cap rates and do a deal. You know, that's where you guys want to get to. But it all starts with learning, which is here, doing constant generation of leads, because it all comes down to how many listing presentations are you going on, or how many buyers are you working with. You got to have buyers or you got to have listings. And the more of those you have, the more deals you close. Then you have a track record and it just builds on itself. Okay? So that's how we do this. So what's another credibility of net lease besides the name brands?
Corporate guaranteed,
Okay.
long term.
Yeah.
Rent increases.
Rent increases, exactly.
Options.
Yeah. Guys know what a zero cash flow deal is?
Bad deal.
Not for everybody.
Yeah, not for everyone.
There's some concepts, yeah, like maybe mortgage people don't like it, but for some investors that are looking for, like we had an investor that wanted to do these zero cash flow deals, and not that many properties qualified, but some corporate-backed CVSs in Arizona worked out, because we had an investor that this guy's worth a few $100 million, and he didn't want to leave cash to his kids because he doesn't trust them. He thinks they're going to blow it. So these properties kind of work for that, because basically all the money each month goes directly to the bank, not to the investor. So basically he can show that he's not making anything off it, so it helps him with tax planning and estate planning, but he's still getting the increase in the property. So it doesn't work on all property. It has to be corporate backed. It has to be someone that needs it for their estate planning or for their tax reasons. And I'll do a class on this with specifics, but I just want you guys to know it in case you ever hear it, so at least you know.
Cash management account for that?
Yes.
Third party?
Yes, right. Nothing can go to the investor, but it all passes through to the bank, but then they're still getting the appreciation. So they still got a 20-year corporate, so it's still going to be worth much more down the road, but when you give it to your kid, they're not going to like blow the money now, but maybe when they're 35 or 45, they'll be more mature when they get the big lump sum, okay? Or, you know, you could just go ahead and flop that, you know, do a 1031 and not even have that, you know, so you could just flop it into something larger because it's appreciated since then. So it's not for everyone, but I just want you guys to kind of know if you hear it, because, you know, do you guys know what, no, I'll go into another class. Okay, so another con. Let's say some of the cons of net lease.
Dark facility.
Dark, yes.
The difficulty in getting financing capitalization.
Financing.
If
Financing is usually pretty good if you have
if there's issues with dark facility.
Okay, so I've had a lot, you know, there's kind of a progression. The more calls you make, the more listing presentations you're going to do. The listing presentations lead to more escrows. Escrows have a higher percentage they close, but sometimes you lose deals. But in residential, you lose deals because they don't have the down payment, you know, so you lose it for financial reasons sometimes. On the commercial side, you don't lose them as much for that, but there are some reasons that you lose deals. Some of the deals you can lose for are environmental reasons, okay? It can be estoppel. What are some examples that would make a deal not go through that's estoppel or SDNA related?
Undisclosed concessions.
Right. Anything else?
How about zoning?
Yeah, yep. So this is all things that, you know, you're gonna want to research before, but sometimes you can't know everything, and sometimes things will come up. The way to handle it is you always have to manage your investors' expectations. You have to let them know what could happen so they're not blindsided when it does happen. So you got to let them know. This is a great property, but we're going to do all this due diligence, and if something comes up where this used to be a toxic waste dump, we're going to be able to get out of it, but we're going to have other properties to go on and still meet your 1031 deadline or whatever. Okay? So basically you just got to like always be on top of everything, and whatever the worst case scenario that could happen, make sure your client is aware of it so it's not a surprise and then they just go find someone else. Okay. All right, so if somebody mentions dark facilities, what would you say to them to, like they're using some dark Kmart, dark Sears, dark retail as an objection to you on not buying into retail? How would you handle it?
Get a better price on dark.
Tenant replacement. So I would look at, obviously what the market's getting in that certain area, or what particularly that market needs. If that, let's say that market doesn't have like a grocery store, or if it's on a really the traffic counts are amazing on that particular area. So I would kind of mention something about that.
Okay.
Straight
What?
to the signer of the lease too.
Right. What I would tell them is that a lot of the places that have closed deserve to be closed. Like Sears deserve to be closed because they didn't keep up, okay? But they do still have some good locations. And a lot of times they're like going in and chopping that up and making it office, or they're putting like, So what retail now has to do is they have to evolve. And what they do is there's REITs that just go after shopping center, neighborhood centers that are Amazon proof. That's the word now. They want to make sure that it's got a dry cleaners, it's got a Jersey Mike's, and it's got a grocery store. Because Amazon's not going to really kill those, at least not in the near future. Okay. Also, these dark Sears and stuff, they're making them offices, or they're making them multifamily. Or a big one that needs the big space is these like small little distribution centers. The big thing about the internet growing is they need little warehouses, even in big cities, to distribute from. Also, fitness centers, Planet Fitness, 24-hour fitness, they're taking these spots because they want them all, they want all the parking, and that's who owners of shopping centers are going after now, because a fitness center brings in a lot of traffic, they need a lot of space, and it brings traffic into your property.
So repositioning.
Repositioning is definitely one, but it's got to be the right thing. Movie theaters are big, especially movie theaters that have beer and wine and serve like food. So that's like a thing now. So retail always evolves, and survival of the fittest, okay? So a lot of these bad locations, they're gonna die away. The prime locations, I mean, Century City Mall just spent $1 billion to renovate because, they know they're gonna be relevant. The Grove is the second highest per square foot average of any retail, because that's what people want, the open concept. The first one is Bal Harbor Shops in right near Palm Beach. But Bal Harbor Shops is number one, the Grove is number two as far as retail centers per square foot sales, okay? How much time left I got?
3.
Okay, so, all right, so what other...
You're locked in the lease in case market rents higher.
Yes.
Also,
Long term.
the less years you have on a lease,
Worth less.
worth less.
Yeah.
And demographics.
Yes.
Less risk, more return.
The demographics thing is huge, and that's one of the things that you get the co-tenancy clause. If you're a small little mom and pop, there's different levels of shopping centers. Like when we did shopping centers, or we didn't do any local or regional. We only went after national, okay? And there's a lot of centers that are in the very best locations. It doesn't matter how much money you have. If you're a mom and pop, they're not interested in you. They want brand names, national names, okay? If you're Joe's Subs, they're not interested. If you're Jersey Mike's, or whatever, if you're Domino's, they'll be interested. If you're Joe's Pizza, they don't want you, because it's more of a risk, but it also helps their branding to get other national and regional brands, okay? So the less value does have to do, but if, you know, the thing with demographics is things change with traffic patterns, with, you know, local stores. So a lot of the national brands have the power to co-tenant and say, hey, if that super Walmart right up the street goes down, I get to bail on here, or I get a big rent reduction because that's where all the traffic's coming from. Okay. Okay. Any other questions on any of this? I think we got a good overview, but these classes, we're going to keep them to 30 minutes, but we got more details here. But the thing is that I want you guys to come to these as much as possible, because the more you learn, the better chance you have when you're up against a Marcus or a JLL agent, because it's whoever they believe is going to be able to do the job and make them money. That's who wins. Okay, thanks for coming, guys.